kiss for you.
We're taking a look at Mongol Stardive, and that might not make any sense to anyone watching this because they have not heard of this game, and most people have not heard of this game because this game had one quick trailer during, I believe, Summer Games Fest 2024 or the Game Awards 2024, and among all the other gacha games and everything like that, like the new Dungeon Fighter gacha and a bunch of other ones, there was this, and it was a quick teaser basically as a sign up for, hey, you should sign up for this kind of thing. And obviously that's the one I gravitate towards, the one that's most likely going to be ignored by the broader public, because I always like seeing, what do these games have to offer. For reference, if you're curious, I've done a discussion on Wuthering Waves, Ethereal Restart. I've also checked out Crystals of Atlan, and I'm going to be checking out ZZZ in the near future, as well as some other gacha games. So I have a little bit of experience talking about and sort of reviewing these games, and we're looking at Stardive here. Now, Stardive is not out currently. It has had 2 closed beta tests. However, I do not suspect that most of the things that are going to be changing with the game are necessarily going to improve what I see as the issues with the game. So, I guess a quick recap of what this kind of game is. Mongol Stardive is, I would say, similar to something like a Honkai Star Rail or a ZZZ, right? More action-focused, level-based game. However, unlike those games, this is a lot more focused on the kind of like pet collecting, similar to Pokemon, but I'd say most akin to Wuthering Waves' Echoes system, where you kind of collect different little monsters here on these keychains, and they give you different bonuses when you summon them to battle. But for the most part, you're going through level-based, kind of structured zones, doing the objectives there with these little guys in tow, and that's kind of the main draw and the main pull is the wide variety of these little creatures that you can collect while you're going through the main missions, right? And you may notice a problem with that structure, and that is the fact that it is a very similar structure to, again, games like Honkai Third Impact, which is the first Hoyo game, ZZZ, similar things to Star Rail, right? All these kind of mission and structure-based gacha games, they all have the problem of it becomes really hard to motivate yourself to play these games, right? Because unlike something like Genshin or even something like Ethereal Restart or these more grinding-based ones, these really just feel like time wasters. Not necessarily that they're bad or anything like that, but just that they feel there's not a lot of motivation to play them. With stuff, with other kind of games, when they're turn-based, there's an idea that you can grind up and gain levels and then progress to the story. Or with open world games like Genshin, there's the idea that you're exploring this world. For these kind of mission-based ones, it's ultimately what ends up happening is you go through the mission, you play it, you get the rewards, right? And then you'll get a couple more missions in, and it will say, hey, go back to the previous mission and grind a bunch, right? Or they'll have some system in play that kind of limits your progress. And pretty much all these games are like this. And the reason that's the case is because these structured mission-based kind of games can't sustain themselves over the time and the live service kind of model that gacha games operate under in order to actually give them like a full experience, right? Frequently speaking, if most of the games like this, when they first come out, you can beat them in like 10 hours, right? Like you can beat them in a very quick pace that's not going to sustain the long-term growth and the long-term commitment you would need from a typical gacha game. So what they end up doing is they end up adding time wasters and extenders and gates, time gating things, right? Anything they can do to extend the grind and extend the playtime of this stuff. The reason I kind of mentioned the structure first and why it's an issue is because, unfortunately, that's pretty much all this game is, at least from what I can see in the 2 beta tests that they have done, is that mission structure with the monsters that are being collected, right? And that's really unfortunate, because I do think there are some things in this game that do work out. The characters, the kind of animations, and the expressiveness of them, some of the world design's interesting, and also the music, right? Like some of the elements here do really come together well, and it's something that isn't necessarily unique, but it is something that is well done in this game compared to, as I mentioned, things like Ethereal Restart or Crystals of Atlan or kind of these other lesser-known gacha games. Compared to those kind of things, this game does seem to have at least the budget for things like character design and voice acting and animation teamwork and stuff like that I think does go a little bit to kind of showcasing that the team here does sort of know what they're doing, at least on that capacity. Obviously, the problem comes in, and the reason I talk about the structure is because the other side, the actual gameplay side of it, is very weak. On top of that weak structure that inherently incentivizes grinding, the combat, the thing you're mostly doing in these missions, is not great. It's okay, but the problem is, similar to ZZZ's combat, it does rely heavily on the need and the desire to constantly switch between different characters, right? Which obviously fuels the gacha part of the game. And what you end up doing with this combat system, because it is not as technically rewarding as something like ZZZ's combat, where you can eventually get really in depth into like the combos and the different modifiers that your abilities have. This ends up being pretty spammy. It ends up being, you're just doing your basic attack, doing your ultimates, and then switching over to the next character to have them do the stuff. And while there is some neat synergy that you can do, obviously, they do have a similar thing to Wuthering Waves, where you have like a get out and get in mechanic. So if you swap out, that has some kind of ability. So there is stuff to do with that. But for the most part, combat's pretty spammy. You got your normal attack, you got your special attack, you got your dash, which you can use for like a counter, and then you have your ultimate, right? And then you have your switch, and your switch does stuff, and you'll have kind of guys running around that can eventually help out with whatever you're doing or just attack normally. And so that's kind of the gameplay model there. As you go through these missions, you're walking around through a forest or what have you, beating some enemies, and then you'll get to a boss. You'll do a boss, and you'll use that combat and use those guys that you've collected to beat the boss. You'll get some reward you use to level up, right? It's a relatively simple structure. Now, obviously, because it's a closed beta test, I'm not able to look at things like monetization for the most part. However, I can say that, like with all these games, it's going to really depend on what systems are in play that make you not want to play the game. A lot of monetization in these games, if handled well, can be ignored, right? You don't need to interact with the gacha system for characters and weapons. It's a nice to have. It's like a cool, hey, if I want more characters, there it is. But you can pretty much subsist off most of these games without having to interact with most of those systems. Same thing with the Battle Pass, and especially with the Battle Pass, you can just pretty much ignore it. No harm, no foul. When it comes to things that I mentioned, for example, in the Crystals of Atlan video, when it comes to design decisions, like being able to buy revives, or being able to buy healing potions, or being able to buy progression items, or being able to unlock certain shortcuts or things, right? The variety of things in that game that led to its problems related to how progression was handled. Being forced to use a BDO-style chance-based upgrade system with fail potential that you can pay to avoid failing, right? Having loot boxes that operate as your wind rewards, right? So instead of getting something guaranteed, you get something that's random. All those things collated to make that game suck to play in progression. I haven't seen anything so far in this game that would be that way. The first couple bosses that are at least in the closed beta test did drop actual rewards. There didn't seem to be any kind of chance-based upgrade system that I could find. It seemed like pretty standard Genshin level up material kind of stuff. There was no way to buy materials. It didn't look like there was any way to do that in the shop. So at least so far, it looks to be operating on a pretty simple model of gacha battle pass monthly sub optional things, right? And obviously the battle pass would have some additional progression material, but not anything crazy, not anything that would devalue the effort that you've put in. So at least from that front, it does look a little bit at least tuned correctly compared to some other examples. But the point here is just to showcase that even with a good gacha system, whatever that means, with decent monetization that's going to work well, it does still get let down by the one question you always have to ask in these games, which is, why am I playing this one? What is it about this game that's going to draw you in? And when you have a very stale, tried and tested mission format in a game kind of mode of the gacha stuff that doesn't encourage that longer term use, unless you do grinding or gating or something, where are you left with? Okay, well, your combat needs to be very good. This doesn't have that. Your characters need to be very good. This doesn't have that. So pretty much what you're left with a boring structure and not interesting characters or story or combat that's not anything exceptional, is you're just looking for the game that really makes you question, like, why am I playing this? What is it about this game that's going to push me over the edge and want to download it and play it and potentially spend money in it? And unfortunately, that's kind of where I look at this game, and I don't really see that yet. It's possible that there is something later on that maybe showcases itself more, and it's like, hey, you should actually be playing this game for XYZ reasons, but so far it isn't that case. Unfortunately, the reason I'm making this video is because unfortunately most gacha games fall into that. I talked about the ones I found interesting, right? Wuthering Waves stands out above the rest, and you can check out why in that video. But most gacha games don't. Most go to the wayside, to be forgotten, this game included, potentially, right? And it just feels like most gacha games fall into that. They fall into the, like, why am I playing this? What's the purpose of this? Is there a motivation to do this? It barely feels like a game, right? All these kind of problems make it so that these games there's so many of them. And ever since Genshin, it's always been like, hey, bigger budget, bigger stuff. And they fail to really understand what makes those successful ones work. Genshin isn't big because it's like Zelda. It's big because it has good combat and a good enough story and interesting enough characters and a world that works and exploration and puzzles that work and a combat looping system that functions and a progression model and UI that's been copied by everyone. It works because every single element of that experience comes together, right? And oftentimes, games like Mongol here or other ones don't. They focus on one thing. In this case, it's the creature collecting. In stuff like ZZZ's case, it's like the combat switching, right? They focus on that and they build a bunch of crap around it. And to me, I don't find that very interesting. I'd rather have a game like Genshin that has a whole package approach rather than one that just focuses on one thing to milk as many people as possible and then has a bunch of crap around it, right? Personally speaking, as I play more and more of these games, I kind of see that. I'm like, okay, so this one thing here is creature collecting and everything else sucks around it, you know? I don't really like that game design approach. I know it does work for games, even not in the gacha sphere, right? I know that kind of setup works for a lot of games, but to me personally, that's not something that I'm ever really interested in. I'd rather have it a little bit more wholesale, bigger picture approach that really focuses on the whole game experience rather than just one good thing or one good element, you know? So, in kind of a wrap up here, I would say definitely keep an eye on this game if you are interested in kind of like creature collecting to any capacity, but I would not hold your hopes up that this is necessarily going to be like the next big gacha or even something necessarily worth playing when it comes out, just because of how weak a lot of those systems feel and a lot of how tried and tested a lot of those systems are. So, but you know, if you are interested in any capacity, you can sign up. It is available through like Epic. Probably it's going to be through Steam. I'm not sure how that may work, but you know, overall it's kind of just that. So if you found this anything interesting and want to see kind of more of this stuff on the channel, make sure to like, subscribe, and do all that, and I'll see everyone in the next video.